Alright, so after 6 years, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has come out, and the plot for it is pretty much this. Still reeling from the loss of Gamora, Peter Quill rallies his team to defend the universe and one of their own. Alright, let's get into the good parts of this movie, and the first thing I'm going to say is the humor. I haven't laughed this hard at an MCU movie since like Thor Ragnarok or Avengers Infinity War. And the movie is a bit dark for an MCU movie, but the humor is able to balance it out pretty well. The next thing that I liked about this movie is Rocket Raccoon, and I thought his backstory in this movie was fantastic because in the first two Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and obviously Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, we don't really learn much about Rocket Raccoon because he's kind of resistant to telling, his friends about his backstory. But in this movie, we get to learn about his backstory, and it is brutal. And speaking of brutal, the villain for this movie, I think his name was High Evolutionary. He is one of the most brutal MCU villains that I've ever seen. And I know a lot of people have been saying that he's not as nuanced as Kang or Thanos or Loki, but I don't think he needs to be. Sometimes you need a villain that's just a really, really bad person that has no redeemable qualities about himself, and High Evolutionary is that character. The next thing I'll talk about is the fact that although Rocket is the main character in this movie and his backstory takes up a bunch of the movie, you never feel like the other characters are left out or sidelined. And in fact, everyone from obviously Star-Lord and Drax and Mantis and Nebula and Gamora, all the way to Cosmo the dog. The next thing I'll talk about is the soundtrack. Obviously, Guardians 1 and 2 have fantastic soundtracks, but this one is amazing as well. And obviously, there's a certain song used in this movie called The Dog Days Are Over. And that scene, if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That scene got me. And I know a lot of people have been saying that the movie has been very emotional for them, but that exact final scene with that song playing was fantastic. And honestly, it's one of my favorite MCU scenes. The next thing that I liked about this movie is the CGI, and I'm not a VFX artist, so I won't be able to point out the little things that are off, but I think for the most part this movie CGI was really good, and it's some of the best CGI that Marvel has done in a long time, because we all know that Marvel CGI has been questionable for the past couple of years. The last thing I'll say before I get into my criticisms is the action scenes, and we all know the action scene in the hallway towards the end of the movie was some of the best in Marvel history, but I thought the action in general in this movie was really well done as well. Alright, let's get into some of the criticisms that I have for this movie, and the first one is that Adam Warlock did not need to be in this movie. You honestly could have took him out and just put some generic bad guy in it, and it would not have changed the movie at all. And this is nothing against the actor, this is more of just a writing thing, because obviously he was supposed to be in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, but for some reason they just never brought him in. And honestly, in my opinion, it just feels like Marvel just didn't know what to do with this character. The next criticism that I have for this movie is the fact that it takes a long time for it to get going. In the first hour and a half, I'm just going to be honest with you, I had no idea with where the movie was going, and it just kind of felt like the characters were like, okay, we got this, now we need to go here, now we need to go here. It just never really felt like an actual movie for the first hour and a half, and it just felt like you were just watching a bunch of random people do random things. And obviously we know their goal is to find something to cure Rocket, but overall sometimes it just felt like the movie didn't know what to do, but they knew exactly what the ending in the final hour was going to be, but the first hour and a half it felt like the movie didn't know what it wanted to be. The final criticism is not really a criticism, but it's more of just an observation, and it's the fact that this movie knows that we know that one of these characters can die, and they definitely play with us in terms of that emotion. And it doesn't necessarily get old, but you definitely do notice it throughout the movie and when the movie decides to kind of mess with the audience. And overall, guys, although I had some minor criticisms for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I really did enjoy this movie, and in fact, I think it's one of my favorite MCU movies. So I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8.25 out of 10.